I'm Cheska. I'm the growth lead for professional service providers here at Miro, and I'm very happy and grateful that you're joining us for the reframe sessions. It's going to be our weekly series for consultants and agencies who know that the old ways of working isn't quite working anymore and actually want to think about how great client work looks like and understand the shifts that are happening in the industry. So last week, if you were here last week, Jerome shared with us his personal story about AI, like going from being super anxious about AI to actually inviting play into his practice, and hope it helped us rethink about our resistance to change. And today we're going somewhere equally important with Adam. And again, it's a very spicy topic on why workshops doesn't actually create the lasting change that we want it to. And as I mentioned earlier, hopefully this sparks some very interesting conversations both here today and also in our community at Miro. And yeah, we're open to any honest takes or maybe even contradictory or debates in the chat if you feel that it's actually worked quite well for you. So Adam is here for us. Say woohoo! I'm way too
Thanks.
excitable here. So he's the co-founder and CEO of Colab, and he spent the last decade in the trenches. He's worked in really interesting startups, and he's worked in launching and scaling products at companies like Product Board, Hootsuite, and Rightmove. He's now building Colab, where they offer live cohort-based learning from product leaders who've actually done the work before. So we're from experts who know the work inside out. So now they work with product teams at orgs like Visa, Xero, and the BBC to really strengthen the teams and reimagine what the product life cycle could look like. And when I was talking to him, what makes his perspective super interesting is that it's very operator led. He's not coming from a consultancy background. So he's not just theorizing about how orgs work, he actually has built things, knows how to shift, and seen firsthand what sticks and what doesn't. So now he's sharing with us his take on why workshops aren't the product and why one-off moments rarely work and what helps create these lasting impacts in these orgs. And yeah, hopefully you get something out of it. Over to you, Adam.
All right, thanks. That was an awesome intro. Thank you all. Yeah, I'm this is the first time I've ever spoken in this type of format before in terms of speaking with consultants. I've never done this before. So I'm not sure if other people have presented to consultants about how we operate. It's quite meta, but I'm really excited for it. But also equally a little bit more nervous than I normally am because I feel like a bit of an imposter. As Jessica mentioned, like I don't come from a consulting background. I've spent my entire career working in product and tech and primarily kind of product leadership in quite high growth product companies, and kind of inadvertently fell into consultancy. And it's been quite a journey for me. So I think I'm not taking the most traditional route in it. So I'm very keen to learn from all of you and just share a little bit about how we work as well. I think some of it might be very familiar. It might be like, Adam, we've done that a million times. You're kind of rewriting the book, or there might be other moments in terms of how we approach or how we think about things that might be a little bit more unique. So I'll just share my screen, and then we can dive into it. And I'm gonna cover a couple topics today, and then there's going to be some time for Q&A. But as Jessica mentioned, just throw it in the channel. And also, if we can't cover off everything today, I'm more than happy to spend a little bit more time talking about what we do. So what I'd recommend is you can join us by scanning the QR code. So we're going to be leveraging some of the Miro capabilities today. And the the kind of quick question that I want to talk about to start is how many of you have run a workshop that people love, but nothing really changed? This is definitely not a trick question. Like sometimes there can be incredible workshops and they might nudge the needle a little bit, but I'm really curious to get an understanding because I do tend to see that this happens a lot. Um, and I think the reason is that most consulting tries to install systems, so frameworks, processes, operating models. But from what we're seeing and kind of why we've started to get a lot more into consultancy is that the behavior change really starts with the system. It really starts with moments that compound over time and moments where people see something differently, or moments where teams try something new, or moments where leaders make a different decision. And when those moments repeat, that then eventually becomes that system over time. And that's really the idea that I want to explore today in terms of how we do it. So interesting, bit of a mix here. I think it also probably depends on the domain and the niche that you're working in, but good to get folks' insight on that. So as Cheska mentioned, I'm Adam Davis, CEO at Colab. We're a New Zealand-based organization, so hopefully you can understand my accent, but we also have a presence in Australia and London, where I'm at the moment, and there's a bit of sun coming through for the first time in weeks, which is gladly welcomed. But we started in a little bit, probably more of an unconventional route. So we started as a community-based initiative, and it was a space for product people to share their fears, goals, ask for help. And really, our mission, which we outlined pretty early on, was to champion the growth of product people. So, fast forward 4 years, we've built our credibility by building an edtech business. So, we have two sides of the business. We've got B2C, which is edtech, and then we have the B2B, which I'll be focusing on a little bit more today. And what we do now is we help organizations accelerate their AI product transformation journey. We made a bet pretty early on at the beginning of 2025 that was going to be a focus for us in B2B. And what we do is we take a very human approach. So building core skills, layering on tooling, and working directly with leadership. And I'll talk to you a little bit about some of our principles today in terms of how we operate. But as I mentioned, I've never worked in consulting before. And before going full time with Colab 2 years ago, I'd hired some in. So as I mentioned, definitely a little bit of imposter syndrome speaking with you all today. But what I do know is that our approach has allowed us to scale and grow. And we've been working with organizations like Visa, for example. We work with the entire APAC team, Xero in Australia and New Zealand, and also Gojek, which is one of our clients, kind of the Uber of Southeast Asia. So the mental models and approaches that we've been using have been working. Hence why I'm still full time and why we've been able to scale the team. So I want to dive a little bit more into that. But what I'm curious about is what always really frustrated me. It was a real motivation to creating Colab was the lack of practical, enduring support within the product world to build capabilities. So we definitely work within a specific niche. We work in tech and kind of high growth product companies, but it's inevitable that through, things are going to break when you stop working with clients. And for me, I find it's like an ever-giving source of feedback on how you can drive better change. And from our perspective and the way we think about it, like we've got a duty to continuously evolve how we do that. So what I'd really love to understand is what breaks when you leave a client today. And I can see some of these kind of adoption, ownership, execution. And what I want to do is I want to share how we think about developing what we like to call these compelling moments and how these moments drive that system of change. And this might be new to some of you, but it's taken us a number of iterations and like massive failures and moving fast to help us build a better mental model of how we think about this. But certainly some of the gaps that we saw very early on is this adoption, this ownership, this momentum that just falls apart. And I think speaking quite candidly, it's an interesting place to be within the services game because a part of you wants some of it to fail potentially because you want to keep working with them. But what we find is that if you're able to really build these systems, you're able to get into much more interesting and more meaningful work as part of that partnership. So speaking with some of the consultants within my network, there's this kind of oxymoron in terms of we want to be that reliable partner. We want to be that they have to keep coming back to us, but they need to be coming back to you for the real reasons. And you need to be making sure that you deliver value. So that's kind of how we think about it. But some interesting ones coming up here. What breaks when you leave a client today? Lack of real sponsorship, following up, execution. Heaps of stuff that we saw and that we've been iterating and driving. But I think the biggest thing is momentum and ownership, and we see that. So before you start creating those moments, there's a few foundations that we put in place. And first, it's about needing a deep understanding of that organization. Now, as consultants, you probably do this already. Perhaps we're not reinventing the wheel here, but our approach, what we want to understand is how the decisions are really made, where influence sits, and where are those incentives? Like, how are folks incentivized? What does that look like? What is that structure? And the org chart really tells you that real story. Like I remember hiring consultants when I worked in tech companies and just becoming really frustrated with how surface level it was. So the first area is about understanding the organization. And the second foundation is identifying champions. And I'll show you in a moment what this kind of looks like as an output. But the people inside the organization who actually want the change are so critical to build as allies and to thread through in terms of how we work with them, not just the sponsor. Like we've learned a few lessons where there might be a sponsor who can sign the check and get you in the door, but you don't actually understand who wants to make the change internally and how motivated they are. And by understanding their motivations, how they are incentivized, you can then build programs that hook them into it. And I had a conversation today with kind of one of the big consultancy firms, and even they're kind of exploring working with us. And one of the big areas that we spoke about is like, what do you want to achieve? Like, what does success look like for you on a personal level? So, first of all, developing that perspective is really important to us. And practically speaking, this is kind of an example of how we develop deep insight on companies that we work with. So with tooling, it's getting way easier in terms of gathering insight, compiling it. But the human element of this is deeply important to me and Colab. So whether it's a group of 15 or 100, what we do is we run an AI product maturity assessment, and then we speak with a large portion of who we are going to be working with. And that one-to-one interaction, it's quite time intensive, but it allows us to get those nuggets of information, build that trust, and build something that's very, very practical. So for our business model, we provide coaching, training, and consulting work. So obviously this insight is crucial, kind of depending on the type of organization that you have, this might differ. But what we found is that not only by sharing these results, but by going a step further and then leveraging AI to enable the team to dive into the data, that drives a much more vested interest in the change. And I'm going to show you some examples of how we leverage Miro and also other tools. So not only are we developing a deep perspective of the organization, but we're enabling the leaders and the entire team to be able to do that as well, because they have so many questions about how the organization works. What are the gaps? What are the strengths? What are the concerns? What are the anxieties that folks have? And everyone needs to feel it. They need to talk to it, and they need to understand the challenges to help drive better outcomes. So that's that lasting change that we were talking about. So what we do is we gather all this insight. We build our own kind of models internally in terms of the surveys that we run, the conversations that we have. Just because of PII and NDAs, I can't show you everything, but there's some examples. So this is a product coach that we built, but we leverage a similar model in terms of sidekicks within Miro. And what we do is we build in the insight from all the discovery that we did, essentially, our discovery phase. And what we find is this breaks down a lot of barriers and uncertainties because organizations can ask it questions. So I'll give you an example, right? This week we spent 2 days up in Scotland. We were working with a global organization. We had about 60 people throughout 2 days. And beforehand, we provided a UI model for them to be able to ask questions just like this, because junior people on the team were always scared or not sure how to speak with leaders. They didn't know the areas that the leaders needed help in or how to ask the right questions. And they're able to start using these types of interfaces to be able to get a better understanding of what questions they could be asking, how they can be supporting their teams, what are the opportunities for them to improve on. So it allows them to dive into that discovery and builds credibility for us. So what we find is that by exposing the data on their teams, this not only builds a shared common language of the challenges, but also motivation and curiosity on how to improve. So we provide an access layer on the discovery at an individual level, but also at an executive level as well. So this is us. We work with a bunch of providers, one of them Gemini Pro 3. And this was an executive coach that we created based on hundreds of data points from their teams. So the exec can ask it questions. It can, for example, this is about how do I improve one-on-ones, right? Like a big gap that we see with organizations that we work with is they don't know how to run effective one-on-ones with their teams to help drive the change that we're also there to help partner them with. So this one, for example, is like how do you shift from output to outcome thinking? This is quite a large initiative that we're working on with the client, and they can use this as a tool to help drive the moments in the system that we want to create inside the organization. And these models are continuously updated based on transcripts from workshops, one-to-one. We remove all the PII. And what we find is that by pulling, sorry, too much talking. I'm excited by this. Um, by pulling the curtains back on the organization, we build more opportunities for questions and then shared accountability of solving the problem. So that's kind of the first area, really building a deep perspective on the client and then sharing that with them. So building on the diagnosis, that there's then a number of key principles we use as like heuristics in terms of how we think about prioritization to create compelling moments that drive improvements for the system. So the first is train the trainer. And in the session last week, which was brilliant, great storytelling, and the speaker spoke about a little bit about this, but one of the biggest shifts we've made in our work is realizing that train the trainer is often the real product. Like how do we enable the leaders and the champions or subject matter experts internally, um, not just the workshop itself. So if the organization can't run the work themselves, then the change usually just disappears when the consultants leaves, right? That's exactly what we talked about in that kind of word cloud that we did right at the beginning. So what we do is we focus on teaching people inside the company how to lead the work because that's what allows kind of moments to repeat. So practically speaking, if we're running webinars inside a broader organization or perhaps workshops with smaller groups, there has to be a leader internally to support us on the co-creation and the delivery. So we're creating the content together and we're delivering it. And what this enables is the external voice benefit that we bring, but also elevates the role of the individual internally and builds credibility of the program and the partnership. Many consultants I've spoken with, and I mentioned this right at the beginning, but they're scared to do this. And there's a fear that it will replace them. But we see this completely the opposite, which is kind of help us grow as a business, is that it builds trust, real momentum, and it deepens the partnership and opportunities for growth within the company. So train the trainer has been a real unlock for us, and it also just makes it more fun, and then they've got more skin in the game. So train the trainer, definitely one of the kind of first key principles. And one of the examples I'll just use here is we spend a lot of time with product teams improving how they bring products to market. It's all about reducing speed to market, time to money. So when we're developing the skills and inputs needed to develop valuable prototypes, for example, so we run a lot of these workshops on Miro, leveraging kind of Miro AI and prototyping. And our work with Gojek, as I mentioned, they're the Uber of Southeast Asia. I think they have like 120 million users every month, so massive product team, massive user base. But because of the key champions who we had trained were leading the workshop, what this did was that it ensured practical exercises tied directly back to their day-to-day work, so they could use it on Monday. That's something that we like to talk about a lot internally. Like, can they use this on Monday? If it's not, then it's not valuable. And then we avoided we can't use this in our company. When we first started and we didn't have this level of insight or train the trainer champions working with us, we got a lot of pushback like, this is impossible, we can't do this. So layering on that was really important. And then we built far stronger alignment on what success looked like. It was incredible to see the change in conversation and discussion that we had when we were explicit in our statement of work that we needed to work with leaders internally to help us build the content. Naturally, we do a lot of the heavy lifting, but we get their input. Now, I'll get input on like voice messages over WhatsApp, or I'll get someone to send me a Loom video. You can make it a smaller lift on their side because there's hesitation generally. But that co-creation, they'll be a lot more thoughtful about what success looks like when you're doing that. And that will help develop the partnership. And we don't work with companies who aren't including the right senior leaders. It's just a waste of time. It's a waste of money, it's a waste of resource, and it's also bad for the brand. So we just avoid that if we can. So the second principle is systems thinking. And the reason that we think in systems rather than frameworks is frameworks really change behavior on their own. So, for example, like you can introduce the best prioritization model in the world, but if the incentives, the planning cycles, the rhythms, and the leadership behavior stay the same, nothing really changes. So, and start instead of starting with systems, we try to create these moments that I've been speaking about where teams start behaving differently. And then those behaviors eventually build the system. So, one example is we see quite often in prioritization frameworks, for example, prioritization in our world, in our domain is really important, of course, like most companies, because it's you're defining where you want to put your spend and where you're going to get the ROI. But a company will bring in something like Rice or another scoring model, and everyone agrees it's a good idea and the workshop goes well. But a few weeks later, nothing changes. And when you look at it closely, the reason is pretty simple why it didn't change. The leadership meeting still works the same way it always has. A senior leader walks in with an idea and says, we need to do this. And then the framework just disappears. So all that effort, all that time. So the problem wasn't the framework. The problem was the system around the decision making. Like, how are they making decisions and how can you influence that? So once we realized that, the real work became redesigning the decision moment. So who brings the idea? How ideas get evaluated? What happens when something scores low but still comes from a senior person, the kind of hippo effect. And once that moment changed, the framework suddenly started working. So really focusing again on redesigning the decision system in that moment. And then those repeated interactions slowly created culture. Like we get asked a lot, how do you create good culture? And that's different for every company and every organization, but it's the repeated interactions and being consistent around it that builds that system, that way of working. The final area is around multi-threading. So if you're not familiar with the term, this is essentially building not only key sponsors, but additional folks inside the organization. Typically, this is a sales tactic that you use to try and de-risk the the risk of churn or if you need to renew with them. Um, but we worked with one organization where the product team was quite strong. They understood discovery, experimentation, prioritization. But every quarter the roadmap would completely reset. And it wasn't because the teams were struggling, it was because the leadership meetings were essentially strategy resets every week. We didn't have them on board. So new ideas would appear, priorities would shift, and then teams would just react. So what we ended up doing wasn't more training, it was working with the leadership group to change how strategy decisions were made. So multi-threading across the organization, being really clear on the outcome that we're trying to achieve, very similar to systems thinking. But once that moment changed, the kind of entire kind of system started to stabilize. And so multi-threading, getting the right folks in the room and working with them was a really important aspect of it. So there are three of the kind of key principles that we like to think about, but we're iterating on this all the time. So we're working with a number of large organizations right now, and we're continuing to adjust and think about how do we build these systems internally so that we can continue to work on more meaningful work with them. But these principles have helped us. The final area that I'd like to speak about is outside of the principles, what we care deeply about is creating the experience. So the experience that individuals have with us as an organization. So, for example, every time we run a physical workshop or working session, we plan every detail. As I mentioned, we were just up in Scotland yesterday. So it's the music, the lighting, the breaks, the food, the drink, how you start the interaction, how you build psychological safety, and also understanding that everyone learns differently. So we'll make sure that we capture that, we account for that, and that we're thoughtful about that experience. And every detail matters. And building more opportunities for these moments and these connections help build these repeatable systems. So this is an example from our community events. So we run different types of AI workshops, skill building, interviewing. We make sure that we layer on different types of experience to also help them with their career growth, right? That's a really big part of these moments that help them feed into that specific system that they have, but also build skills for the future as well. Finally, one shift we've made is thinking about delivery not as an event, but as a sequence of these different moments and these phases. And then we build that into our business cases and how we work with clients, and that these moments that build on each other. So, for example, we might start with a foundation session, then teams apply these into pilot groups, and these pilots reveal the friction exists, and then that learning feeds back into the organization. And there's these kind of rituals that we go through over time where we see these repeated behaviors become more of the culture. So instead of trying to install a system up front, you kind of grow it through moments. But one thing I'm really curious about is how do you drive sustainable change for a client? What does that look like for you? Follow through, self-direction, feedback. Awesome.
I guess while people are also sharing their snippets on Engage, if 1 to 2 people want to share a bit more about this, feel free to raise your hand and yeah, maybe share your own practical examples so everyone can learn from each other.
Yeah, I love that. Co-design is great as well. All right, I've got one more slide. I can go to that in a moment while these come up. Um, Co-design, feedback, accountability, love it. We'll come back to this in a moment, but I think one final thought that I'll leave with you is, and this is a bit of a theme I think throughout these sessions, but essentially really what we're hearing in the market, and I'm sure what folks are as well, is frameworks are everywhere now and content is everywhere and it's a lot easier to access and create um, a lot more IP inside of an organization that consultants would. And like AI can generate strategies, documents, analysis. But the real advantage we still have, and I think a real defensive moat, is that human element. So helping people navigate complexity, being that sounding partner, helping teams align, help leaders make decisions, and creating those moments where behavior really shifts. And AI can like scale the output and perhaps the quality, but humans scale that commitment. And what I spend a lot of time thinking about for us and our mission is like, what is our advantage as humans? And one thing I like to encourage my team, and one thing I'd love to kind of leave with this group, and perhaps we can talk about, is for you to do the same. And I'm really convinced that this is a defensive moat, and it's key to building culture and compelling moments, this kind of human aspect that you can build into your business and these experiences. So hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully there was some nuggets there. I'm sure I kind of talked to some areas that folks know about, but this has been our journey and kind of what's led us to kind of have quite a successful number of years, and hopefully it continues. But we're always kind of learning and evolving. And yeah, I'm really excited to learn from this group and stay connected. And I can drop my link and LinkedIn here as well. But yeah, with that, happy to answer any questions or dive into any thoughts that folks have on what I shared today.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was great. I think that it's a super important framing that you shared, especially around designing beyond moments and also finding key champions within the org that go beyond your initial sponsors. And it's an honest reframe, right? We definitely need to ask ourselves, what would be most beneficial to the team, and maybe even redesign some of our offerings and services around what actually works. I know there's a lot of people who might want to share their thoughts. I see Alex has his hand raised. So you want to get us started with maybe thoughts and questions, Alex?
Yeah, I have a starting question. Thank you, Adam, for your story. Have you ever considered to achieve individual change on habit level and cultural level and transformation level to introduce coaching as a umbrella next to the workshops and the changes you want to achieve?
Yeah, definitely. And there was a couple of questions in there about examples. So that's how we operate. So what we do is, for example, if we're working with a client for 6 to 12 months, there might be consulting deliverables along with that, training, but we've tried a number of different ways of how to scale coaching and also just the practicalities of it from commercially. And
Hmm.
what we find is office hours and being able to create space for questions and AMAs has been the most effective. So essentially running sessions like this and using it as connective tissue between each of the workshops that we have. Um,
Hmm.
so that's for general groups. For leaders, we'll typically do a little bit more one-to-one coaching and monetize that separately. But the coaching aspect has been really effective.
Yeah. Well, you might have guessed from my personalized coaching approach that I'm seeing a nail and I'm using my hammer, but I'm using a different hammer than you're describing. It's not one-on-one coaching for the team leaders. It's individual coaching for everyone involved, and using AI to scale it. Because it's very low cost. It's 24/7 availability, and you can easily take a long period of time to influence everyone that has to be influenced or for the positive outcome. So that and it's still a hybrid solution. So there should be some individual coaching, especially for the leaders that you are, the champions that you mentioned, like the learning and development champions. Those need to be even more coach on this, but for the participants that you want to, as a group, to change their behavior,
Hmm.
individualized AI coaching is very effective. And obviously, I'm more than willing to show you some examples of that, how to easily set it up with not too complex AI systems. We could even do it in Miro. It's a little bit less automated, but it's quite simple to set it up and to keep a group engaged.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know a little bit more about it. So we can certainly connect on it. Like, how are you benchmarking performance? Like, how do you understand if it's more successful or less than real time?
Uh, I'm sorry to answer it bluntly. It's quite easy
Okay.
because AI can it's so helpful in qualifying it. Recently, I've made a demo for the Miro MCP challenge, and I actually created a working dashboard, a manager dashboard, in which more than 20 people put in their coaching efforts. And the first steps is actually sorting it on a Eisenhower scale on urgency and importance. And it's very easily done to feed the AI's prompting to qualify those people just by simple asking them to give it a percentage, and it works very well. We also use it in our final step guardrails in the coaching, just when the coaching advice is being generated and ready to be sent. Then there's one more step, and that's a psychological evaluation on the referral percentage, because as a coach, you have to finally you have to make a decision if you also want to refer the client to a psychotherapist or a psychologist, and it's
Right.
just
Okay.
asking it, and you will get a very nice scalable percentage. And it's not absolute science, you understand it, but it's more than impressive how AI can qualify that. So that should not be any challenge at all. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome, mate. Thanks for your
Yeah.
insight. Thanks for your
Yeah.
question, Alex. Harry.
Hi Adam, thanks for a great presentation. Some really nice nuggets in there. I love this idea of redesigning the decision. I think that's a really nice little thought kernel to take away and digest. I think there's just two relatively simple questions from me. I guess first of all, just to give you some background about who I am. I'm a service designer working at Connected Places Catapults, who are one of the 9 innovation catapults for the government, and I've spent some time working as an innovation manager. But my background is architecture, so I'm a sort of chartered architect, and I've been working in architecture for about 12 years. So a bit of a squiggly career for all intents and purposes. But my two questions really was one around this idea of multi-threading. I think I like the idea, but I don't think I quite understand it. So maybe if you could explain that to me, like I'm a 5-year-old, it would be great. And just maybe some practical examples. And the other one really is around what do you think is an essential element that you want to see in all the workshops and engagement pieces you do with clients? What's your sort of absolute essential workshop element? Because I deliver a lot of workshops, and I've got loads coming up, and it's always good just to hear other people's thoughts on what makes those moments really special.
Yeah, I love it. Two great questions. Something I've had to learn over time. So what I mean by multi-threading is like typically, like if you think about, just imagine we are selling a SaaS tool. Imagine we're selling Miro, right? We're going to an organization, we're selling Miro. Now, what sales folks do that is a bit of an anti-pattern is they'll be working with one specific person in the organization to try and sell it to. And they'll be going through the sales journey with one person. So that's where the term is typically used. Um, so it's kind of table stakes that if you're trying to sell into an organization, you need to have multiple people, right? That's kind of no-brainer. But we take that a step further by mapping the key folks and building multiple relations once the engagement starts. And that's what I've seen folks do wrong, where they're like, oh, boom, we're in, we've signed the check, we're going to work with that one individual. And the risk that we've experienced is that you need to understand how they're connected to the company, their incentives, their leadership team, rah rah. So you need to build relationships with the right people. That's essentially what it means. Yeah.
Yeah, spread your bets a little bit as well.
Exactly, yeah.
Nice.
And then the second part, what do you think is essential element? I'd love to hear what other folks think. We developed this through like the edtech side of the business. We train a couple hundred people every year on it, and the formula that we've developed that's just a no-brainer is it has to be practical.
Mm.
Like you in the session, it needs to be related to your work. And that can be a lot more work to make it practical. But going that extra mile and making sure, like just say we were doing an accountancy workshop to try and help folks better understand how to use Xero or whatever, they need to use the tool in the session. And that creates buy-in. It also doesn't feel like extra work. It's adding value to them there and then. So that's how we think about it as an essential element. That's one of a few of them, but I would say practicality is super important. Yeah. How do you think about that?
Oh God, yeah, good question. Yeah, put the burners straight back onto me there, haven't you? Yeah, I think for me, I think I probably a little bit simpler than that, really. I think when I do workshops, I often have multiple stakeholders, multiple levels in the room, from a hippo all the way through to sort of delivery teams, whatever. I think for me, it's about designing moments where every voice in the room is heard and being quite purposeful with that, and ensuring that it isn't just sort of taken over and you don't drift into groupthink, because it's so easy to do that. And I think people who may be less experienced in workshops think it's a good workshop because a few people spoke for long periods of time and everyone was nodding along. There's often that's a point of failure, right? So I think designing moments where you purposely call upon all voices in the room and keep an eye on that. I think it's super important.
Yeah, I like that. The facilitation part is so important. Like
Yeah.
I think that's where teams fail. Yeah.
Often overlooked as well, I think.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love
people
that.
think facilitating is just turning up and telling people when parts of the exercise are start and finish, but there's so much more to it than that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate
Awesome. Thanks, Harry. Cheers, mate. Sid?
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation today. I'm based out of Chicago, and so I'm an AI PM, and we build solutions for our clients, and then we kind of just go in and actually listen to their, their pain points, build a solution, an AI solution that fits. The problem that we find is sometimes there's a lot of hesitancy or fear in adopting this technology because it seems like it's going to replace the person that's actually going to be and that's going to be using it. Or the solution that we build is a solution that provides a lot of fear amongst the stakeholders. There's champions, they feel really excited about it, but then the broader group does not feel very thrilled about this new technology because they have a fear that they're going to get laid off or their jobs are going to get cut. Could you kind of, and this might be slightly different than what you do, of course, but I wanted to really understand, how do you get over that fear and how do you really champion adoption and allow these people that we build a solution for to really embrace the solution and actually go, start using it instead of, being fearful of it?
Mm-hmm. Great question. We come up against this a bit too. So I think there's a few things I would be thinking about. I don't have a really polished answer on this, but I'll give you my take. So
Sure.
firstly, it comes back to how you're selling. So what's your value prop? What is the outcome that you want to try and achieve? What are past examples? So I think framing that right at the beginning to make sure that people are on board is important. I'm assuming the inertia or the feedback you're getting are from folks who haven't been involved in the sales process at all, and it's been kind of given to them. Is that?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, mostly.
Yeah. So how we overcome that is it comes back to first understanding their fears and speaking to them and making sure that when you're delivering on these new solutions or services that you're being very thoughtful about them having an understanding of what this is going to enable them to achieve. And like, for example, when we work with product people, they get nervous around some of the tooling and training that we're doing because A, they don't feel comfortable using it. B, they've actually been doing a very different job from what leadership thinks they should be doing. And
Yeah.
we by providing the right training, for example, like AI tool training, for example, we work with product people all the time. So many of them are just in one quadrant out of the three others they should be working on. And what this tool is actually going to enable them to do is to increase the altitude of the work that they're doing. So by being able to understand their fears, being able to build a relationship with them, but also framing it in terms of what this opens up for them and their career, we find helps move through some of that inertia and starts to build that momentum. And a big thing I always speak to is like this is coming whether you like it or not. And if you want to build skills for the future, not just the company you're working in right now, we want to help you get there. So that's how I think about it. Could probably give you a more crisper answer, but hopefully that helps. Yeah,
No, that was an excellent answer. Thank you so much.
cool. Thanks.
We have Heike. Heike, you wanna unmute?
Thank you. I'd like to continue from that fear theme. It's connected to teams and organizations. When do we want to be creative, innovative, and we must cooperate? The fear arises when people are suspicious. They don't know what is going to happen. And this is a structural process in many facilitations or coaching situation or service design. When we are inviting people to openly create something new, they must feel safety and trust. But if they feel that, okay, that person, that designer or that moderator or that facilitator is leading us to somewhere, it gives an impact that, okay, they have an agenda. They already know the plan, and we have been listened because it's popular to listen people, but they have already decided. It's not necessarily this way, but it all starts from the beginning, how to create the trust. And this is a question of subject-to-subject relationship. So if the people feel that they are objectives, they become these processes. But if they feel that they have been listened, they are subjects in the process, then it's a question of thinking together, creating something together in a collaboration. I've been training dialogical facilitators a long time, and of course we train facilitators mostly for difficult cases, take up social sector, health sector, school sector worries and so on. But the same system is in every organization, in everything where people are gathered. And there comes also the fear. So it's a question of how do we start the process? How do we create the mutual trust and feeling for the people that I've been listened, I've been respected, and my input has a meaning. That's why we need the highest bosses also involved in this kind of collaborative meetings. It's not working if they have their own level in the upstairs. They are doing something. If we want to create something new, if it's like that.
Yeah, totally. No, thanks for adding your points. Like it needs to be thoughtful, but also in today's age, it needs to be relatively quick, but thoughtfully done. Yeah.
But if you spend, for example, 3 hours at the beginning in a proper way, you save time when you proceed.
100%. Yeah.
You must have enough dialogues at the beginning, so during the process, the possibilities are starting to massage against each other, and it's quite automatically you can make the decisions, and people feel that they have been listened.
Yeah.
So if you use 3 hours at the beginning, you can save many hours during the process.
Totally. Well, the old Albert Einstein, right? If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and then 5 minutes solving it. And for example, we've just delivered on a client. We did 4 weeks of discovery and 1.5 days of workshop. So that's the delta. Now that's elapsed time, right? But yeah, you're totally spot on. I agree. All right, we got room for one more if there is.
One more questions. Let me just look through the chat. I think John had a question that we left unanswered. So she was asking, curious, given your work, whether your sponsors and champions are typically within the product orgs or are they actually leaders? Are there other unlikely leaders that have been pleasant sources of surprising support? Where do you find your champions, essentially, when you're doing multi-threading?
Yeah, that's a great. So typically they would sit within product, but what we find is you are more successful when you start to involve the likes of HR, sales, or go-to-market because they feel the impact and are highly motivated for that part of the organization to perform better. So I think it's a combination of the core area that you're working with, but also the folks that will benefit from that change, especially at a senior level.
Sense. Hopefully, Joan, that addressed your question. And I think I saw Teresa raising her hand just now. Teresa?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. And thank you, Adam, for this amazing presentation. I really like this aspect about this understanding what the people in the workshop are fearing. But sometimes we don't actually have the space to have these conversations with the participants before the workshop happens. And there's a lot of people that are facilitating workshops without actually wanting to ask any survey questions before or any kind of interviews. How would you tackle this? Because otherwise you'd have to make a completely improvisational workshop to account for any possible fear that people might have if you don't know what the people fear before.
Sorry, so you're saying how do you approach a workshop if you aren't able to do the discovery beforehand?
Yeah. Mm.
So can you give me an example and also why you don't do the discovery?
Well, for example, I'm running a workshop, an AI, workshop for a bank in 3 weeks in Germany for middle management. And the people that I'm running the workshop with agreed that we shouldn't do any kind of surveys or discovery with the participants. So we have basically discovery done with like who is paying for the workshop, but we don't have it with the participants per se.
Why do they want you to do discovery? That's what I'd be very interested in.
It's just different people have different styles of running workshops, and I'm part of a team that has different styles of running a workshop, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. So I think we've only got a couple of minutes left. So the first thing I would consider is the sales process and also the expectations that you're setting. And the reason I say that is we've run hundreds of workshops and we know that they are far more effective if you're able to have some input beforehand. Now, it's not always possible. Like, you're totally right. So ways that we've navigated this, and I think there's some really good suggestions in the chat, is you actually start by doing some light discovery right at the beginning. And that will put a little bit of pressure on how you run it and what you speak to. And I think that's a really important muscle to build as a facilitator, regardless of the field that you're in. So, like, I've come across that many times where, for various reasons, you can't. But I do feel like getting their input right at the beginning, airing those potential frustrations, and I bet you that group will be like, leadership doesn't listen to us, or they don't trust us. But understanding that right at the beginning is going to enable you to change the narrative and get their trust throughout it. And if I, like, maybe you don't want to do this, but what I would do is I would say we couldn't do discovery with you. So we're doing this based on best practice, depending on what your domain is. But we also want your input now to help shape this and future ones. So that's how I would think about it. But it's really important to get them on board. Otherwise, they're going to turn up and be like, here's another 2 or 3 hour thing that I haven't been able to have input into within reason. So that's how I would think about it. But I appreciate it's not always perfect and you always can't speak with people, but the facilitation is really important.
Thank you, Teresa, for the question, and thanks, Adam,
Yeah,
for
that was
all
a
the
great
thoughtful.
question.
This was such a great conversation, guys. I really appreciate all the questions that you've peppered in. We're running out of time, so I just want to make sure everyone got something away out of this. And if you want to connect much more with Adam and understand his work, please do connect with him on LinkedIn. Let's all give him, if you can take a bit of time to unmute, and let's give him a round of applause. That would be lovely. It's always a good burst of energy when we do that. So yeah, thank you so much, Adam, for
Thank you,
sharing
Adam.
knowledge and sort of
Thank you.
pushing us and provoking people here to think beyond what they normally sell and really think through the systems and what change they can bring about with the orgs that they're working with. And as I mentioned, if you want to stay connected with Adam, just connect with him on LinkedIn. I'll drop his connect with us actually. I'll drop the links there in chat, and hopefully we see you in the next reframe session. This is going to be a series that, given the audience response and the sort of conversations we're getting out of this, we really want to continue it with you. So hopefully we see you in the next one, where we'll have Colin from Mosaic Innovation pushing us to think what actually happens beyond innovation work and how we can reframe the idea of brainstorming with clients. So that's also a very interesting one to stay tuned for. And again, thank you to everyone for joining, especially to Adam, and hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks. Keep up the good fight, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
That's a good one to end with. Cheers. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.